will come to order. Last March, our two subcommittees held a hearing on Reconstruction in Iraq, where it became painfully obvious that none of the major goals of U.S. reconstruction efforts had been met. In particular, the oil sector, the engine of Iraq's economy and the source of 90% of its revenue, continued to produce at well below pre-war levels. 3 years ago, the Coalition Provisional Authority set oil production targets at 3 million barrels per day. Last year, according to GAO, Iraq produced an average of 2.1 million barrels a day. And this year, Iraq is averaging only 1.9 million barrels a day. In terms of oil specifically for export, Iraq produces 1.4 billion barrels a day, 800,000 barrels per day below the goal, and 100,000 barrels per day less than last year. So 3 years after the CPA set the initial target, not only is Iraq not producing anywhere near the goal, they're actually going backwards. At $50 a barrel, that's a $40 million per day in lost revenue, $14.6 billion per year, or almost $45 billion less than expected since the targets were first established 3 years ago. Where I come from, $45 billion would buy a lot of reconstruction. But the story gets worse. Apparently, between 100,000 and 300 barrels of oil per day go unaccounted for. It's just gone. The Government Accountability Office reported in May that over the last 4 years, Iraqi oil worth somewhere between $5 and $15 million a day may have been stolen, siphoned, or maybe not even produced. Surprising the Iraqi people not demanding that we bring the old crooks back. What GAO has uncovered here is that neither the Iraqis nor we know even precisely how much oil is being produced. Unfortunately, it's not just crude oil production where the targets are being missed. The CPA also set production targets for natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas, as well as stockpile targets for gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and LPG to ensure that domestic demand could be met. In all these areas, Iraqi efforts, as well as our own, have fallen short. Natural gas production was 70 million standard cubic feet per day short of the goal. LPG production was 1,291 tons per day short of the goal. And instead of 15 days each worth of fuel stockpiled for domestic use, there's only 3.5 days worth of diesel, only 4 days of kerosene, only 2 days of gasoline, and only 1 day of LPG. After having spent more than $2 billion of American taxpayer money building Iraq's oil infrastructure, you'd think that we would at least know how much oil was being produced. Since oil production is one of the milestones we're using to measure reconstruction progress, it seems to me that precision in this regard would be something of a priority. You'd also think, having spent all that money, that Iraq would at least be showing progress towards achieving the production goals, but not only is there not progress, production levels have actually declined. We're not exactly getting a lot of bang for our buck here. But perhaps it's just as well that the Iraqi government didn't have that revenue anyway. Last year, the Ministry of Oil budgeted $3.5 billion for capital projects in the oil sector, but only succeeded in spending 3% of that money, $35 million. Not an impressive track record for a government that will need billions of dollars to sustain the oil sector long after the United States has withdrawn. Beyond simply trying to get the stuff out of the ground, Iraqis need to establish the legal regulatory framework which will make clear who decides how to exploit Iraq's oil and who benefits. Unfortunately, only the legal framework has been sent to the Parliament for consideration. Legislation on revenue sharing, restructuring of the oil ministry, and establishing the National Oil Company all remain in some political limbo. This debate inside of Iraq has become a metaphor for who will rule Iraq and how. It defines the struggle between those who want a strong central government and those who want the regions to have more autonomy. And it lays bare the sectarian division over Iraq's wealth. Shias want the central government to control decisions about currently producing oil fields, exploration of new ones. Kurds want to interpret the Constitution and the proposed oil law so that they have the right to determine how new oil fields are exploited in their areas. Sunnis think that no matter what the Shia and Kurd decide, it will leave them out in the cold. Political breakthrough here could galvanize ordinary Iraqis into believing that their leaders actually can make decisions for the greater good of the nation. Political stalemate will only reinforce the downward spiral of an already raging civil war. Like everything else in Iraq, the stakes are high and the costs of failure are great, but in the end it is the Iraqi people who will have to solve this problem, no matter how much we wish they would make the decisions that seem obvious to us. We will ultimately have to let them decide on their own. I'd like to turn now to the